around politics.
Okay, this is not.
This is the second iteration.
This is not the second time we're recording this. I did not have it on the wrong output. Everything is fine. Nothing happened.
It's lucky we got only like a quarter of the way through.
Not even that.
Otherwise, that would have been calamitous.
So
we didn't even get that right.
No, okay. I don't think we even got that far. So anyway, pretend this is the first time. So we're in a different environment today. We're at my dad's house.
I guess it's deja vu.
Fuck off! Oh my god! I didn't mean to put it on the wrong output. Oh my god! So if you hear the screamings of an angry bald Tory, or the sounds of a sick Asian woman, or the sounds of generic baking, that's why. We're in a different environment to usual. We're usually at my mum's house, which is empty, or at your house, which is very
I thought you were about
quiet.
to reveal the address then. I was like, please don't dox.
No, so we're at 19. No, so anyway, let's record this, because this is the first time we've ever spoken about these issues, ever. We've never had a conversation about these things before. No, it's not. No, I did not have the wrong output. Anyway, so Trump's tweets. Have you heard these?
I think I have.
So Trump has been making some incredibly strange tweets. The first one, something along the lines of, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." And then there was another one he made about New York. And I want to exactly...
Fundamentally, the problem with these is that it doesn't bode well for the assertions of some that he's becoming a more imperial-based president. He's usurping a lot of power, and he's almost circumventing the Constitution.
Especially with the second one he made, which was, "Congestion pricing is dead. Manhattan and all of New York is saved. Long live the king." Which is an incredibly strange thing.
And if you don't know, the system of the US was predicated on a republic.
Yeah.
And a divergence
fundamentally,
from the monarchical system of the UK. As seen in the Boston Tea Party.
So it's fundamentally
they don't like kings.
They don't like kings. The whole thing was they not like King George the Third. King George III, who was posing too many taxes on them.
Historical knowledge there, Simon.
King George III, who's posing too many taxes on them, but they did not have representation in Parliament to argue against these taxes.
Predominantly on tea.
On tea and stamps and sugar. What happened was they had these taxes on basically everything, because after the 7 Years' War, Britain was out of money, so they had to tax the shit out of their colonies. So eventually they ended up scrounging up a bunch of money, and eventually they started protesting, and then King George III was like, okay, let's get rid of all the ones except the one on tea, because that one's funny. So, and then the Boston Tea Party happens, where a bunch of people dressed as Native Americans and threw the tea into the harbour.
And interestingly enough, the Tea Party movement in the Republican Party was based off of that.
Exactly.
Gave some inspiration.
So it's obviously, I feel like it's indicative of like this thing. It has a pattern of doing this now, because fundamentally, no matter what you think about whether we should have had the aid programs in the first place with USAID, which it's a misleading kind of abbreviation, because it's not just like aid programs, it's like international development, so it'll help.
And these are pretty much work visas similar to that of the UK, where people can come in, normally if they exceed a salary requisite, or they're not going to bring tons of family members in, and they can get jobs in normally it's certain sectors like technology, but it'll be normally a temporary visa and then eventually expire.
No, but USAID, it's not. It's a misleading abbreviation. I mean, it's for international development. So there's a developing country, the US, which is the largest economy in the world. It owns like 20-something% of the GDP of the entire planet. 26, actually, I think. It's a large economy. They've got a lot of money to spare. Might as well just share it out to developing countries that are trying to get a foot in the door. But ultimately, then Elon Musk has come along and cut all these federal funding programs approved by Congress. So ultimately, now we have a situation where one guy and his lackey. Well, when I say that, I mean Elon Musk and Trump, respectively. Trump's the lackey in this situation. Did you see them? Did you see them at that press conference in the Oval Office?
The one with his strangely named son?
Yeah, so I actually want to pull up a chart I saw about Elon Musk's kids. Like how many he has from how many different women. So these are all
Do you reckon
Elon
he,
Musk's
like,
kids.
Do you reckon he wrote his name when he was drunk or something?
These are all
Elon
Elon Musk's kids. So with Justine Wilson, he had Griffin Musk, Vivian Musk, Damien Musk, Saxon Musk, Kai Musk, and Nevada Musk. With Grimes, he had XAAXII, Exadark Side Rail, and Techno Machinus. With Shivon Zillis, he's had an unnamed child, Strider, and Azure. And the most recent one, which we'll get onto in a minute, is this third one that it's empty can. The most recent one is this 13th child with this fourth woman. We don't know what he's called, or she, or they, but it's there, and it's another child he's had with another woman. So I don't know how significantly younger than she is from the looks of it. But
it's weird. These names either sound like stripper names or aliens. It's weird.
Yeah, but then there's XAEXII, which is the only one he seems to hang around with regularly, and he's only been hanging out with them since the shooting of that CEO. Like, do you remember this? There was the shooting of that United Healthcare CEO in New York, right? And up to that point, Elon Musk had largely been hanging around with himself and the Trumps. Then all of a sudden, this like shooting of this big healthcare CEO occurs. All of a sudden, now he's got his son with him at all times. It's either as like a sympathy thing or just as like a human shield, right? So, but then it's the only one he hangs around with. And there was this press conference in the Oval Office, and Elon Musk was like standing up. He was giving all these answers, and Trump was sitting at the desk. And I kid you not, Elon Musk's kid, he leans over to Donald Trump, and it sounds like he says, "You're not the president, you need to go away." Now, he's 4, right? So at that age, that's his dad's ideas. That's just his dad telling him this, which I think is hilarious. Then he's just going around telling his son, "Yeah, I'm the president's son. That Donald Trump guy, he ain't nothing compared to me." Like, it's just...
That doesn't really bode well for these assertions that Trump is Musk is the new president. Sorry.
Yeah, no, there was a Democrat thing when they were trying to pass that expending bill, and then that one Democrat called him President Musk, and then he started comparing her to a Skeksis from the Dark Crystal. But then there's no, it's an incredibly strange thing to see from the president, the fact he's just overturning all these congressional spending bills, and then there's it's strange. But then also it goes on to our next point about the White House's strange Instagram posts. So with
what
the
strange Instagram?
Oh my god! I didn't mean to hit the wrong output. Okay. So what happened was.
So that sounds like a pantomime.
So what happened was basically when he posted "Long Live the King," the White House Instagram account posted this. I'm going to assume it's AI generated image of Donald Trump with a crown on his head, with New York City sky in the background, with "Long Live the King" in the bottom left corner. Then they posted this strange video saying, with like these deportation flights, which I want to point out, these are different from the regular deportation flights because they're being used with military craft to deport the immigrants, whereas under Obama and Biden, while immigration was an issue, Obama campaigned against immigration quite strongly, I think. But illegal immigration. The way that Biden and Obama did deportation flights, he used commercial planes, whereas Trump is now using military.
Yeah, so if people don't know, within his first day in office, he promulgated a monsoon of executive orders, one of which was declaring a national emergency at the southern border, hence necessitating the use of military force to expulse all the migrants.
Yeah. I went down the wrong hole. Oh, Christ. So anyway, then yeah. So they're using military crafts, and then the White House Instagram account is posting like ASMR of the illegal deportation flights, like the jingling of the trains.
If people don't know what ASMR is, I wouldn't suggest searching.
I'm gonna explain it in the most family-friendly way I can. It basically is like little noises. It's like noises in your ears. They're meant to give you a certain feeling. Give me the tingles.
An erotic charge.
We'll kind of call it the tingles. The tingles.
Yeah.
I'm meant to give you the tingles. And the White House Instagram account started posting this about the illegal alien deportation flights, in quotes. And they're like, it's like jingling like the chains on the ground, the tarmac, and the shuffling of the feet of the migrants they're deporting. And then there was also the one when he posted, he said his country's not violating any law. He posted that with his official inauguration photo, which obviously harkens back to his mugshot, because the White House Twitter account, they also posted another thing for President's Day, and it says, "They're not after me, they're after you. I'm just standing in the way," with a photo of Donald Trump's mugshot and the official presidential one side by side, intentionally trying to draw a comparison there. And then there was there's the, Christ, where is it? The Valentine's Day one. Have I lost it? Where's the Valentine's Day one? Here it is. Valentine's Day one. It's Trump and his border czar. What's his name? Tom Hoffman? Is his name?
Yeah, Tom Hoffman.
Tom Hoffman. Little cutout faces, like a sticker. Pink background. Hearts in the background. And it says, "Roses are red, violets are blue. Come here illegally and we'll deport you." Which is a nuts thing for an official government account to be posting. It is incredible. It's such a strange thing to be seeing. The official White House.
You came up with that rhyme. It's so imaginative.
It is, yeah.
Right.
But can you imagine if anyone else had done this? Can you imagine if Keir Starmer had done this? We'd Mussolini his ass. We'd hang him up in the streets and spit on his corpse, right? But the fact that Donald Trump sometimes just gets away with it, I don't get the thing behind that.
Well, I think one thing's very pertinent. He's playing the populist card.
It is. It's the whole populist thing where basically they can populists are fundamentally they say whatever the fuck they want. Can they do it? Maybe not. Probably not. But then ultimately they just say all this stuff. They get the people's support.
It's also about appealing to people on a more visceral level.
Yeah.
Rather than actually having substance in your policies, it's about creating that support around the cult personality and around your personal charisma, as opposed to your actual policies or your ideology. They often confound ideology, these cultists, really.
And then this is an incredibly strange thing. Anyway, so I want to get onto the PMQs. Oh no, Kanye West. So Kanye West, those who are not familiar, Kanye West is a rapper. That made me sound about 40 when I said that. Jesus Christ, I'm going to cut that. So Kanye West, he made good music, and then he said stuff about Hitler. People were like, maybe not. So, but then eventually, recently, people were like,
I don't have a contention with that. Did he actually make good music?
Graduation's a good album. Graduation's an alright album.
Well, very versed.
Graduation's a good album. His other stuff, I know this is a pretty hot take, but his other stuff is fine. Past about Donda, they get really shit. But other than Graduation is very good music, but the rest of it's kind of fine. But then the problem is then he said some stuff about Hitler on Alex Jones. He said every human being has value, especially Hitler. Not even Hitler, especially Hitler. And then he said he made the microphone that I make my music with. He made the motorway. He made the car. And it's well, none of those are true necessarily. I know. None of those are exactly true. He made a Volkswagen just to make a cheaper car. He expanded the Autobahn. The Autobahn was already there. He just made it bigger. And I genuinely don't know where the microphone thing came from. I have no clue. Microphones were a thing before Hitler. I don't know where he's got that from. But then he started waffling on, and then basically everyone was like, okay, maybe he's not a good guy. Then eventually a few years have passed now, and people are like, okay, maybe he's got a bit better. He may be a bit weird with his wife, trying to display her some objects. But ultimately, maybe he's not.
Yeah, he was using some kind of token display.
Yeah,
displays in ordinate masculinity.
Yeah, so then we saw Bianca Censori, who's his new wife after Kim Kardashian, and then they started dressing more modestly.
Who also has half the world's plastic in her face.
Exactly. They could really use to take advantage of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, honestly. And then
it goes well for the sea turtles.
Exactly. But then something really strange happened. He shows up to the Grammys. His wife is wearing this rather thick black fur coat, and he's there just in like a black t-shirt and like trackies, whatever. And she takes off her big furry jacket. She is wearing this practically see-through dress but nothing underneath. We can't show you the uncensored version. We have to show you censored versions. But if you want to find the uncensored versions,
oh god, that's terrible.
I saw one from Tommy in it. But anyway,
at least you're giving him credit.
Yeah, I saw it from Tommy in it. But then he parades his wife around again like someone. People are like, oh okay. Then he goes onto Twitter and he builds a new merch shop on Yeezy.com. And it's just this t-shirt that says Free Diddy on it. And then he starts going on this tirade. He says stuff like Free Diddy, and then he stops going on to Free Diddy, and then he starts moving on to I'm a Nazi, I love Hitler, so what bitches, suck my dick, how's that for an apology? And then David Schwimmer, he made a post about this, and David Schwimmer...
Just add some context. David Schwimmer is Jewish.
Yeah, David Schwimmer is a Jewish actor. He played Ross on Friends, probably what you know him from. But if you're my generation, you know him as Melbourne from Madagascar. He made an interesting assertion. He was like, okay, we obviously can't stop people from saying this. That's impossible. But what we can do is stop them from giving them a platform. So what I think, what Kanye West and his, quite frankly, mental episode says about Elon Musk and how he's running the platform, because his account wasn't suspended. He deactivated his own account on his own accord. I think it's still a Twitter-affiliated account, right? Even after... He went on the Super Bowl, right? A Super Bowl ad. And he got given a bunch of money to make a Super Bowl ad for the Yeezys. And he just sat... Honestly, this is a bit funny from him. He sat there in a hospital bed. He was like, so I spent all the money for the Super Bowl on these new grills. So, I don't have any money left, so go to Yeezy.com. So that's just it. But then you go onto Yeezy.com, plain white t-shirt, black swastika on the chest. Just that. Like, not even the Hindu one, like the full 45-degree Nazi one, right? It's like ridiculous. And the fact that his account wasn't suspended, he deactivated his own account. In my opinion, it says a lot about Elon Musk's Twitter, considering all the stuff that he's been promoting. Because he's intentionally engineered an algorithm to promote his own tweets. Meanwhile, on his account, he's promoting far-right content. Thus, if you like Elon Musk's posts that the algorithm is suggesting to you, then you're automatically recommending more right-leaning content. So, I think this is a lot about the way Elon Musk is running the platform, Kanye West and that whole thing. But anyway, let's get on to the Prime Minister's question time. I'm going to ask this to you like it's the first time I'm asking you, and you're going to answer it like it's the first time I'm asking you. Did you watch the most recent PMQs?
Simon, I did watch the most recent PMQs.
Fuck's sake. Okay, so at this PMQs, Kanye Baynott brought this point, and she was like, hey, listen, 6 Palestinian asylum seekers used the system that's put in place for Ukrainian immigrants, Ukrainian refugees and asylum seekers, in order to come to our country. Is the Prime Minister going to close this loophole? And Keir Starmer said, yes, I will. And then it devolved into this incredibly strange back and forth, where the two of them were just like, I want less brown asylum seekers in this country than you do. And it was incredibly weird to watch. And it was just... Because the people, I've said before, the fact that these asylum seekers are being treated so differently from Ukraine.
It's a contradiction there, especially from the Tory party. Constantly lamented about immigration, illegal and legal immigration. When there's Ukrainian immigrants, let them in.
Yeah,
Any other race,
this whole
bar
thing.
them from the country.
I noted on this when I was still quite politically inept back in 2022. Like when I was like only like slightly familiar. Right, I think it might have been actually before Boris Johnson resigned. I was just like, it was this whole thing of like, why is it when there's like wars in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and we're so like the whole culture is about like so against these people coming in, but these Ukrainian refugees, they're coming in, we're letting them into our homes and all that stuff. I think we should have the same standard for both. We should probably both just like be a bit more welcoming to these refugees who've like had these awful conditions being bombed by whether that be Russia or Israel or in some cases the United States. If they're coming in here to seek asylum, we should treat them with the same level of respect.
Well, I think if you're talking about Boris Johnson, it was really a case of political optics. I think he wanted, if people don't know, in 1983 Thatcher called an early election because she won the Falklands War. And I think he wanted that same thing. He wanted to capitalise and monopolise on that sense of national cohesion that maybe would come from winning this war. Or
this is what my dad said. So my dad said, my dad's quite a staunch Tory, and he said even he admits Thatcher was relatively unpopular before 1982, and what she needed was just a small war in order to just
because realistically Argentina were never going to win that war.
Because her largest popularity was about 52%, and it was just after the Falklands War. Tony Blair's highest popularity was 98% just after the Good Friday Agreement. You'll see it's a lot whenever...
You're talking about approval ratings.
Yeah, approval ratings, yeah. And you'll see it's a lot with like presidents and stuff. You can literally, if you look at George Bush's approval ratings over time, you can see when 9/11 happens, you can see when he invades Iraq, like on the graph, because it shoots up after 9/11. Highest rating for any president ever, 98%, it's nuts. Right, then after he invades Iraq, it's 71%. And then it's just a slow trickle down from there. Because obviously then all the Abu Ghraib prison, all that stuff came out. And then it's just, But then, no, it's just the fact we treat them so differently. It's just like, I'm going to close the loophole harder than you, Kanye West, now just watch me. But I'm going to close it harder than you, Keir Starmer. And it's just like a back and forth between the two of them. Just like, I'm going to stop Muslim migrants. And I don't even know if they're Muslim. They're probably worse, statistically speaking. I'm going to stop Muslim migrants coming to this country harder than you are. Watch me. And these two countries have suffered unimaginable conditions, whether it be from the Russians and the Israelis.
It's such a weird line to play from Labour, sort of propagating that they're so welcoming and they're so empathetic towards migrants, and then when the issue actually arises, oh no, get them away.
Then what was really strange then was Kanye West, not part of this debate show with Keir Starmer, was at one point she mentioned, should the British government be allowed to do what it wants even if it violates human rights laws? And that was an incredibly strange thing to see.
Basically the contention here is the fact that the UK system is predicated on what we call parliamentary sovereignty. So the notion that Parliament is the highest body in the UK because it's democratically elected, it has a mandate. Unlike the US, obviously the Congress has a democratic mandate, but they have concurrent and separate powers that are of relative co-equal power. Now, in the UK, there's sort of been, since 2005, in the Constitutional Reform Act, there's been a usurpation of power in terms of the relation between Parliament and the judiciary branch. So, the Supreme Court has had more of a proclivity to weighing in on political matters. And I think the contention here is, well, what gives them a right? A body that's constituted of people who don't really represent the views and sentiment of the country. If you see the membership of the Supreme Court, it's predominantly toffs from Oxford. I mean, how can their promulgations and their adjudications be indicative to what the UK want? And really, a lot of these people on the Supreme Court are liberal elites who don't necessarily represent the views of the working class. And I think, although I don't agree with what Starmer and Badenoch were saying, the point they're making is apt.
You lightly touched on something I wanna bring up. I was playing Hearts of Iron as I usually do, and I was watching this interview from the Rest is Politics from it's before the election with Rachel Reeves. And she kept on waffling on, and I was just like, none of what you said there is what you've done. Obviously, you just lied over and over again in that interview. She's like, we're going to stick to the mandate. She's not sticking to the mandate in the slight she was given. And then also, you touched on stuff like Oxford. Rory Stewart comments on this. If you want economic growth, stop focusing all your economic growth into the triangle in the southeast, London, Oxford, Cambridge. Invest more in the north, because there's a lot of what people call benefit scrounge in the north ultimately, like
chavs.
Yeah, well, chavs, benefit scrounge, whatever you want to call them. But ultimately, these are people who are unemployed and are using the welfare system post-Thatcher, to clarify, because when we had the welfare state under a more socialist government in the post-war era from 45 to 79, unemployment was at 1.6%, which is unheard of. It's ridiculous. But then Thatcher comes along, revamps the welfare system, kind of blames the poor for being poor, and then the whole system's changed, and I have these benefits grounders. If you invest more into areas that haven't been invested in as much, like the Northeast, for example, then you're going to get more economic growth, and you'll have to raise taxes. But basically, the whole thing with economic growth, they keep pushing, oh, we're going to do economic growth. Fundamentally, the belief is, which is true, if you have more economic growth in a country, you can invest more into public spending without having to raise taxes. That's why they're waffling on about economic growth. But they've already raised taxes, and economic growth isn't doing so hot right now. And I think it's on the down. I think I saw a report, there were economic growth by 0.1%, big whoop. But there is economic growth, but it's nowhere near what they need to rebuild the NHS, fix the prison systems, and basically do anything that they promised they want to do.
The thing is, they came into power on false pretenses that they couldn't, that they were going to revamp the entire system, they were going to pummel lots of money into the NHS. But really, you can't do that without enacting extortionate cuts or raising taxes.
And then it's incredibly strange because they cut the defence budget, right? Then they say there's this, again, like I said last week, there's this £22 billion black hole they keep talking about, right? But then now all of a sudden, $9 billion for the Chagos Islands. Maybe we might be deploying ground troops in Ukraine. Who knows? But then also now that all this money has miraculously appeared, and it's like, how about instead of using this money to kill people in Ukraine potentially, how about you invest that into the public services you said you were going to invest in? Just a thought. But then that's what I want to touch on with the PMQs.
Yeah, it seems like there's only a 22 billion black hole when an issue arises that was the fault of the Tories.
Oh, they make everything the fault of the Tories. What do you mean?
Yeah, they don't want to take responsibility for that. So
no, it's. I remember I watched the new Captain America movie, and it's the most unrealistic movie I've ever seen in my life because a politician took accountability for his actions. It's unheard of. But then next, I want to talk about a little bit to do with the general election. It ties in a little bit with what happened in Munich. Basically, there was a debate, and basically the four major parties leading is the Greens, the CDU, the SDP, and the AfD. Remember, borderline neo-Nazi, far-right figures. So these four were all debating, and essentially, even after Friedrich Merz, I was talking about last time, he hosted this poll about this migration law he wanted to pass, and the AfD showed up in droves to vote for this, and now basically he got blackmailed into working with the AfD to deliver his migration mandate, which is against EU law, reminder. But then all three other parties all avidly opposed the AfD. The only person on that stage that was anti-Ukrainian was Alice Weidel with the AfD, and Friedrich Merz was laying into her, just kept going, look at all this money that we're going to put into Ukraine, and you're just sat there doing fucking nothing. And then Alice Weidel she got absolutely laid in that, but I don't remember exact specifics, but I remember seeing clips of it, and it looked like she was getting fucking arse handed to her. But then election polls, I think AfD's dropped a couple points last time I checked. So the elections are sending. Actually, no, they might be in a week. Exactly in a week. It'll be our German election special next week. But no, it's just. The elections are soon, and Alice Weidel has managed to ask.
Just to add some context, I mean, the elections tend to be a lot more contentious in Germany than that of the UK because their system's based upon proportional representation. So if people aren't versed in types of voting systems, as maybe me and Simon are, proportional representation is a system whereby the votes cast approximately coordinate to the seats gained, whereas in first past the post it tends to be a winner's bonus. Mm-hmm. So the seats accorded aren't necessarily indicative of the consensus of the country.
So for example, in the most recent general election that we had here in the UK, which is first past the post system, Reform UK got more votes than the Lib Dems did, but the Lib Dems
they also
won
came
more seats
second
in
in about circa 100 constituencies.
Yeah.
Something like 4 million votes in total.
It's 4 million votes in total for Reform UK compared to about 3 million for the Lib Dems. But the Lib Dems gained 62 seats, whereas Reform only gained 5.
And if you actually look at, if you take a more proportional standpoint, if you look at the votes per MP, quote unquote, it was about 1 million per Reform MP, whereas for Labour I think it was circa 50,000.
Yeah, no. Our MP, he only won by about 22,000 votes, I think, and I don't know where.
Careful saying who our MP is. We don't want
It's a big area. It's like,
yeah.
It's a big area. We've already said his name. It's fun.
Oh, have we?
It says on the last podcast, yeah. But no, John Pierce won by about 22. It says on the last podcast.
So now I know we live in the past.
They said I said on the last podcast.
Did you?
Yeah, at the very end, I invited them on the podcast. But no. No, but it's just this whole thing of like our MP, he got 22,000 votes, I think, and Robert Larkin got about 14,000. I don't know how many Reform guys got. I think it might be less than Lib Dems, or maybe a little more.
I was under the impression he came third.
I think
Reform actually got quite a big inroad in. So I think
could have been. I don't remember.
Right.
But then anyway, moving on from election stuff. This security conference, right?
Right.
So basically. You want to explain what the context of what the Munich Security Conference does? Or,
right, okay, sure.
I'm lightly familiar with it.
So, basically, Munich Security Conference, it's a load of countries who come together every year and discuss issues pertaining to security.
Yeah, so usually...
So whether that be... Yeah, normally it focuses on external security, but this one took quite a divergence from that. So J.D. Vance, who if people don't know, I hope people know, is the Vice President of the US. He used this to facilitate talks on the internal problems faced by a lot of European countries. So much of his speech was focused on the retreat of freedom of speech in the UK. So he talks about this guy, let me just get his name.
I forget his name. It was I know what you're talking about. The guy who's praying outside the abortion.
Yeah. O'Connor, I believe, was his last name. But basically, the government in 2022 implemented this thing called public spaces protection orders. So outside of some public services which are subject to political, protest or political contention. They imposed this barrier of 200 meters in which people can't do anything that would be considered protesting outside of them.
So in this example, it's the abortion clinic. So if a woman makes the incredibly difficult decision to abort their child, they can now go in without being harangued and harassed outside by a bunch of Christians and just degenerate conservatives going, "You want to do this to your child, you disgusting freaks." They can now do that in peace now without having to be harangued into changing their mind. What happened was this guy, he was about 50 meters from the abortion clinic and police told him to move, like multiple times. He didn't move and he was arrested. No matter what you think of this law, this man broke the law and he went to prison for it. This is not rocket science. And J.D. Vance outlined this was some crime against freedom of speech.
What J.D. Vance was relented is that this law shouldn't be in place in the first
I think
part.
women should have the right to, peaceably do this incredibly difficult decision for them without being harangued.
You do have to take into consideration, it's not like he was obstructing them. He wasn't actively defying them from entering the abortion clinic. He was simply praying for a kid he'd aborted about 20 years prior.
But then the difference is that basically if we don't have such a perimeter, then you will have people who are going up to women and going, "It is your child, you disgusting people! Don't abort your child!" And these women obviously are doing that, and obviously if someone breaks that perimeter, no matter how they broke the perimeter, they're still
But the problem is you do need to disseminate between physical obstruction and policing for. Because this man didn't actually deny them access to abortion. He simply was praying, which is within his and should be within his human rights to do. But obviously, because of this law that was promulgated in 2022, he wasn't able to do that, and then he had to pay a fine of something like £9,000.
Isn't that under the Tories as well?
That was under the Tories.
That was under Boris Johnson, right? Because
that would have been...
It would have been Boris Johnson, because Liz Truss would not have done that.
She didn't have enough time.
No, not only that, she acted like Trump's repeal on paper straws, like some great champion. He's going to save the world because he's allowing plastic straws again. But no, it's just this whole thing, and it's like, even if these free speech laws are to an extent somewhat ridiculous, which in some cases they do tend to be. Scotland's a big example with the hate crime bill they had, where basically it was like, Scotland's hate crime bill, sure, if you want hating a hate crime bill, that's insane. But if you actually read the details of the hate crime bill, part of it entails, if I was to say something hateful in my own private home, or even lightly hateful, something that could be considered offensive. And
I think that's the problem.
No, it's worse. No, it's worse. It gets worse. If I tell that to somebody, and that somebody tells that to a third party, that third party now has an obligation to tell that to the police. That I have said that in my own private home. Like some of these laws are incredibly ridiculous and out there. But even it's like with the Scottish hate crime bill, you can't play Hitler in a show, even if you don't agree with Hitler. If you're in a theatre play and you're portraying Hitler and someone perceives that as offensive, then you can go to prison for playing a character in a play who is intentionally racist and you don't agree with the values of the character. Yeah, my problem is it's trying to police and trying to militarise subjectiveness. You can't put arbitrary rules on what could be considered offensive to some people but not offensive to other people. My also main contention with this is that I think it's sort of actively dissuading people from exercising their right to free speech. When you have these ludicrous laws, it actively impedes on people wanting to exercise these rights. They're not going to want to do these things because they're going to have a fear of being arrested or being penalised. But then the problem is, even if these laws are ridiculous, in some cases they are, as we pointed out, JD Vance is not really in a position to be commenting on this because his administration, Trump administration, has banned you from calling it the Gulf of Mexico inside the White House. It's banned you. He's actively currently working with alongside Russia, who, if you speak a single word against the president, you get thrown out a 5-story window. Remember that ballerina recently? It was a Russian ballerina. Is it a different term for guys? Ballerinas? Because a male ballerina.
No, it's the same term.
Male ballerina, spoke out against the president. And then, mysteriously, this ballerina, who's very well known for being incredibly coordinated, tripped and fell out of a 6-story window and fell on the pavement and died. What a coincidence that was. Since the war in Ukraine, 2,000 people have been arrested for speaking out against the army. And is that like free speech is in retreat in Europe because mainly, I'm going to assume because it's part of the riots, where 30 people were arrested for threatening to burn down asylum hotels and mosques. And that's incredibly different to saying a negative thing about the army in Russia. 2,000 people have been arrested in Russia compared to 30 in the UK because of the riots.
I think what he really was getting at is that the sort of cultures of the West versus the Third World are inherently different. One of those disseminators is the tenet of free speech, and when you obscure that right, when that right seems to effervesce, then you sort of meld into that culture. You need that. You need the foundation of free speech to ensure we don't become absorbed into the kind of heinous culture you see in the Middle East, where people, if they even dare to criticise the government, if they dare to make a lamentation against the government, end up bludgeoned to death and on the back of a lorry to Beirut or something.
But no, it's just. I'm not entirely sure if JD Vance again is he in a position to talk about.
Well, I don't think he's in a position to talk about this, but I think the point was
if it was any other guy, this may have been fine. But then there was all the other stuff he said, and then he said about basically Romania cancelled the results of an election because they believe there was Russian interference, right? And then JD Vance, he said, well, if your democracy is so fragile, it can be dismantled by some Russian paid social media post. It probably wasn't even worth having in the first place. And he really thought he made a point. 3 people in that entire room clapped. And then they realised no one else was and stopped near immediately. Because he really thought he made a point. And he allowed room for applause, and everyone else was just kind of like, no one else is clapping. Okay.
Yeah, people don't know the Romanian elections were cancelled in, I think, November or December. Basically, well, it was under a pretense there was Russian interference in the election, but a lot of people would suggest that it was because the far-right candidate, or the perceived far-right candidate, was the highest in the polls, or won the...
Some people are saying, yeah, well, it's okay, well, JD Vance didn't say that. What he said was the part about the Russian possible interference. And he's just like, well, Russians could interfere in the elections this easily. Probably wasn't worth having in the first place. And then he really thought he made a point there, and he just didn't. But then my other issue with what he said was there was one moment which really was so fucking funny, because again, it was in the moment where I was like, oh, I've already made a point here. Own the libs with this one. He said, if we can deal with 10 years of Greta Thunberg's nonsense, you can deal with a few months of Elon Musk. And he really thought he made a point. You could tell from looking at his face. And not a single person clapped. Not a single noise from the audience. And he was just like, it was so awkward to watch, because he thought he made a point, but he's so happy, because the difference is Greta Thunberg is just an activist. She, no matter how extreme her methods are, she is just an activist. Elon Musk, richest man on the planet, arguably one of the most influential men on the planet, who is currently in a government position of violating what Congress has put forward previously. No matter what you think of Greta Thunberg or Elon Musk, the situation is incredibly different, and they're not comparable in the slightest. And then, just after he had made this speech, there's like kind of an unwritten rule in Western democracy where if there's an election coming up, a leader from a country or an important figure from another country cannot kind of interfere. A government official cannot interfere in that election. Then apparently after this, JD Vance did not speak a word to Olaf Scholz, who's the current Chancellor of Germany. What he did have a private chat with Alice Weidel, who's the head of the AfD, as we said earlier, who then immediately afterwards posted this tweet saying, great speech, JD Vance, absolutely fantastic. And it was just like, well, he has his affiliations with the AfD, who have a vast history of racism and anti-Semitism to such an insane degree, and he's borderline openly supporting them, and his top spokesperson is saying the AfD is the only way to save Europe. It's just incredibly weird. And
my problem with the fierceness of his speech is that there was really a sense of incoherence there, because he was condemning European values and wanted to differentiate us from the Middle East, yet surely that would diverge the sense of homogeneity he wants in Europe.
Yeah, and again, it also then ties into the fact he's saying free speech is in retreat. Trump is currently now defunding schools that promote critical race theory and gender ideology, whilst funding schools that promote more Christian and conservative values. And he said in his thing, we're not going to allow them to indoctrinate our children with this critical race theory and gender ideology. And then he goes, we're going to teach our kids to be proud of their country. That's just, is that not also indoctrination, but just a different way? Is that not just the same thing? And he again, claims to be a bastion of free speech, like he says he is. Sure, say you want to have free speech, but then don't work with people who are violating free speech. Don't violate free speech yourself. And ultimately, also with the USAID funding cut, it's about international development, right? All these again, to quote Keir Starmer here, there's now a black hole in the market, right? No one's funding international development programs. Who's going to fill that hole? It's fucking China. China's going to fill the hole. Second largest economy in the world, 16% of the entire GDP. They're going to now fill the gap the US has left. So fundamentally, Trump, without knowing, has weaponized China to do whatever the fuck they want. And it's another point I have here about these tariffs on China. They don't make any fucking sense, right? Because he said he was going to put a 100% tariff on BRICS nations for undermining the US dollar in trade, right? Then he says he's going to put a 10% tariff on China. So, logically, Dominic, would you not assume then that is a 110% tariff on China? 10% tariff on China, 100% on BRICS, of which China is a member. Would you not assume that's logical? 110% tariff on China.
It's not logical, but
no. If he just says 10% on China, 100% on BRICS, China's a member of BRICS, 110% for China, then by logic, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Except Trump said recently in one of those interviews where he signs executive orders, he doesn't know that China is a member of BRICS. He doesn't know that China is a member of BRICS, which is just nuts to me. It's the C in BRICS. I feel like that should, raise a few flags. Just a couple.
Yeah, just a tad.
So then anyway, then the next thing that happened, not long after, and even not long after, not long before this security conference in Munich, what happened was then Trump started initiating talks about Ukraine, because remember in his whole campaign thing, he said he was gonna stop the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of being elected. Then that obviously didn't happen. So he said he was gonna do it within 24 hours of being inaugurated. That also didn't happen. So now finally he's initiating talks about peace in Ukraine. And so there's one small issue here. Volodymyr Zelensky or any Ukrainian official has not been invited to these talks. It's Trump, Putin, and the Saudis, right? Trump, Putin, and the Saudis, right? The Saudis are officiating the whole thing. It's Trump and Putin, fundamentally. But no Ukrainian official has been invited to these. And it's just incredibly... Again, I think Trump's attitude, depending on where it is incredibly different. Because his attitude with Canada and Greenland and stuff like that, it's this almost like Caesarian style to land, where it's like, that's not mine, so give it to me. Same attitude Caesar had when he conquered France. But then, meanwhile, with his policy in Europe, it's this almost kind of Neville Chamberlain ideal, where it's like, oh, we'll just give Russia this. They'll leave the rest of Europe alone. Trust me, I know this. And then, meanwhile, also doing the same thing he did with Czechoslovakia in 1938, when Hitler was demanding the Sudetenland, which is this largely ethnically German province in northern Czechoslovakia. Neville Chamberlain essentially just gave it over to him because it was like, okay, listen, don't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia, don't invade the rest of Eastern Europe, and we'll be fine. Just have this little bit, and we'll be fine. And Czechoslovakia was left out.
Committed the Anschluss.
It's after Anschluss. After Anschluss.
Oh, this was after the
So it was Anschluss, Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, World War II,
okay.
in that order. So then what happened was then basically they had this meeting in Munich, at the Munich conference, and France and Britain were on one side, Germany was on the other, and Italy was the neutral mediator official, which is not what we consider from Mussolini. But then they had that conference, and Czechoslovakia was not invited to these talks, which I feel like is similar to what's happening now with the Sauds, who fundamentally have more of an interest with Russia than they do with the United States, right? Because I remember Vladimir Putin, he made this thing, and he said no UN peacekeeping forces are allowed. UN peacekeeping forces are allowed into Ukraine, but they're only non-NATO UN peacekeeping forces, and the only nation that falls under that would have the capacity to deploy UN peacekeeping forces into Ukraine without being a NATO member is Saudi Arabia. So, and it's another one of these autocratic, practically a dictatorship, even though it's technically a monarchy, but whatever. But they're basically officiating over the talks. It's just incredibly a strange thing to happen, and it's just I feel like we're going in circles again with the whole thing with Czechoslovakia, now Ukraine, and I feel like, I don't know, just incredibly weird. And then you see all the defences from people on the right in the UK, Boris Johnson, Richard Tice, Nigel Farage, and Donald Trump. He also said like stuff like, Trump, like, Ukraine started the war, and that Volodymyr Zelensky's approval rating is at 4%, which isn't true. Obviously, Russia started the war. They invaded first.
Yeah, just to fact check it. I think it's about 57%.
Look, Zelensky's rating is about 52-57%. Which
in 2024, it did plateau at about 24%, and then it went up to 40%.
It was around about half before the war. Then obviously it shot up because of the war.
Yeah.
It's been going a little bit down since then, as most things do. It's still above 50%. Trump, I think genuinely it might just be approval poll envy, because Trump's is lower currently than Zelensky's is in actuality. And then he said that Russia started the war, which obviously isn't true. No, you said Ukraine started the war, which obviously isn't true. And then the people on the right, like Boris Johnson and Richard Tice and Nigel Farage, their only conceivable defense for what he said was there is no possible way that one human being can be this fucking stupid. Right? I want to read you what Boris Johnson said 1 second. These are his exact words. When are we Europeans going to stop being scandalised about Donald Trump and start helping him to end this war? Of course Ukraine didn't start the war. You might as well say that America attacked Japan at Pearl Harbor. Of course a country undergoing a violent invasion should not be staging elections. Oh yeah, he said the thing about elections. The whole thing with the Republicans at the moment is they're trying to say that Zelensky is a dictator because he hasn't held elections recently.
Well, his term has expired. It expired in February.
His term expired in February, but they're meant to hold some new elections. But obviously, it didn't happen because it's hard to track an election when there's a risk of the ballot boxes being blown up by a Russian missile. And we didn't. And as Johnson says here, we didn't hold an election from 1935 to 1945 because.
The problem is you can't contradict the fact that it is at a more autocratic disposition, Ukraine, at the moment, because he has surrounded himself with technocrats. Zelensky, obviously, it was under martial law for a large part of his tenure.
But I still think calling him a dictator who didn't hold an election one time, because you can't really hold a free and fair election if you're being bombed all the time, because again, there's a risk the ballot box is being blown. You can't really count votes reliably if you're being shelled, right? And we didn't hold an election in 1939 when we should have, because there's a blitz and stuff like that, and you couldn't really call Neville Chamberlain or Winston Churchill a dictator. Now would you? And it's just, and the only thing is they're saying the United States is the Republican Party's only excuse for that is that we held elections during the war. And it's like, well, you weren't being directly bombed consistently. We didn't hold them in the UK because we were being directly bombed consistently by the Germans. Ukraine isn't holding them now because they're being consistently bombed now by the Russians. You only held them because you got bombed once by Japan. Is that the Americans got bombed once by Japan. It was in 1941 before they actually declared war. So it's a different scenario, and it's not really comparable. And then Johnson also said, of course, Zelensky's ratings are not at 4%. They're actually about the same as Trump's. Trump's statements are not intended to be historically accurate, but to shock Europeans into action. That's crazy. His only possible excuse is just like, that he's not trying to tell the truth. He's trying to shock the Europeans, which, to be fair, kind of has worked. Because after Trump was waffling all this, Macron, the French president, which is more your territory than mine, so they called an emergency meeting essentially, and basically it was to discuss what do we do in Ukraine now, because obviously Trump's going to be pulling out of their stuff. So I think he's been spreading this lie essentially that the US has invested more than all of Europe has, which I don't think is true as far as I'm aware. I think it's about the same, or leaning a little bit more in favour of Europe. And he keeps on saying this $300 billion number, which isn't true. The US invested $175 billion into Ukraine. And then he says that half the money's missing, and somehow he manages to blame that on Zelensky, that the money's not there. Like, how is it Zelensky's fault that he's not received the money? Like, I don't get how that works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it's just an incredibly strange situation that we're in, where now Keir Starmer's saying he might deploy troops on the ground in Ukraine, and we're two fighting age men. Who knows? Podcast might be put on delay while we do our service in Eastern Europe. But it's just very weird. Very, very strange.
Yeah.
But I think that's everything. Oh no. Wait, no, it isn't.
Oh, no.
Rachel Reeves, her resume. Ooh. You see this massive scandal that's been going on inside the UK government. What's happened is Rachel Reeves, she consistently claimed over and over again she was an economist at the Bank of England and HBOS for about 10 years, right? However, reports possibly suggest that's not true. It's more likely she worked at the Bank of England for about 5 years, and at HBOS she was not an economist but in customer service. So we now have a major minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, lying on her resume, which is a totally normal thing for someone who's handling all our money to do, lie about their economic record. And it was just, I saw that on the news when I was at my grandparents' house recently, and that was just interesting to me. Anyway, thank you for watching this week, everyone. It's been.
We'll have to cut that last part.
So anyway, that's everything we have this week. I think, unless you want to do anything else.
I don't think so.
Okay, so I think I'll see you hopefully next week for our great German election special. Oh my god, you're trying to do the outro here. Do you fucking mind? We'll see you next week on Playground Politics. See ya.
See ya.